The city has a long memory, longer than any of us. Every once in a while, I like to walk its dark streets and think about the first people who ever tried to make sense of this mess. The first minds that looked at chaos and thought, there's a pattern hiding in there somewhere. Because like them, it is my job to find that pattern. I carry a logic textbook. I am a logician. If I had a time machine, the real kind, not the kind you find in cheap dime store novels, there's one guy I'd like to spend a few minutes being. Not a king, not a conqueror, a thinker, a teacher, a philosopher. Who am I talking about? A Greek from a long time ago named Aristotle. One of the sharpest minds that ever walked the streets. The guy wrote about everything. Nature, politics, poetry, psychology, ethics, music, language. But the case that matters most to us is reason in itself. Folks say Aristotle invented logic. That is quite a claim. Sadly, it is not quite true. People had been reasoning since the first hunter figured out where dinner passed through the woods, figured out how to catch it and cook it and eat it. People had been reasoning even before that. They had been reasoning since the first pair of hands picked up one stone instead of another because it cut better and made it easier to get their dinner. They may not have known it, but those stone-wielding ancestors of ours were using logic. They just didn't know its name. No, Aristotle didn't invent logic. What Aristotle did was something bigger. He noticed something most people never do. He saw that reasoning has patterns. Even better, he saw that those patterns come in two kinds. The kind that hold up under pressure and the kind that fall apart when you shine a light on them. That realization was as big as fire, as big as the wheel, maybe even as big as written language itself. So I ask you to picture this. Picture a young Aristotle, still learning the ropes, studying under his teacher, who was another ancient Greek philosopher named Plato. They've been arguing all day. Big ideas, human nature, truth, reality, good and bad, just and unjust, right and wrong. And Aristotle's got that feeling. You know the one. One of Plato's arguments did not sit right with him. Something was off, but Aristotle couldn't yet say what it was. So he does what every good detective does. He writes it out, looks at it slowly, studies the structure, and suddenly it hits him. What if arguments are not just talk? What if they're built from parts? What if an argument is an attempt to set out statements that lead to another statement? We can call some of those statements premises. We can call the statement they supposedly support the conclusion. Aristotle froze. He knew he was onto something. Exactly what, he was not yet sure. But before we go any further, perhaps you would like to see an example of an argument. Here is a famous argument. Like this, all humans are mortal. Socrates is a human. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Now just try and tell me that is not a beautiful thing. Two premises, a conclusion, clean, tight, nothing wasted. The kind of reasoning that holds up in any courtroom in the universe. But then Aristotle asks the real question, the dangerous one. Is this the only way to build an argument? Or are there other ways? There must be other ways, he reasoned, since he and his teacher Plato had been setting out and analyzing arguments for years. But then, how many ways can you build arguments like this? Infinite? Or are there only a limited number? And do they all work, or only some? So Aristotle starts cataloging them. Any argument with two premises and one conclusion. Every possible combination. Day after day. Line after line. Does this sound tedious? Does it sound slow? Or is this what a good detective does? Work through the evidence slowly and methodically. You guessed it. Aristotle was one of the greatest detectives in history. Up there with Pinkerton and Holmes, Father Brown, and Horace Rumpole. And what do you suppose Aristotle found? I can tell you this. What he finds is wild. There aren't endless forms. There are exactly 256 arguments of the sort he was looking at, made with 2 premises and a conclusion. And out of all those, only 24 actually work. The rest? Broken, flawed, convincing on the surface, but rotten underneath, just like many of the arguments you meet in real life. That was the moment humanity realized something huge. Reasoning isn't random. It has rules, and if you know them, you can tell good arguments from bad ones. You can separate reason from nonsense. Now, I don't imagine Aristotle popping champagne. They didn't have champagne back then, but even if they did, that's not how he rolled. Aristotle was a calm guy. He liked moderation. But how did he feel inside? That must have felt like cracking the biggest case in history. Finding the hidden order beneath every debate, every theory, every disagreement humans ever had. Because once you know the rules of reasoning, you're no longer guessing. You're investigating with method. Now, I am going to teach you Aristotle's system, the first formal logic ever built. We'll see which arguments walk free and which belong behind bars. Because every argument has a structure, and every structure leaves a trail. And if you follow it carefully enough, the truth always shows itself. So, stick around and maybe learn something useful and become a logic detective yourself.